writing the books has kind of altered my brain and made me a lot better able. As long as you're trying, as long as you're exploring, it'll probably come. It's never too late to make an adjustment or to find who you are. I didn't write the 48 Laws of Power or start writing until I was 36. And up until that moment, I was kind of a lost soul.
Cesar Rodriguez Jr. is now known as the last American ace fighter pilot.
Cesar Rodriguez, the fighter pilot.
But he wasn't interested in becoming a pilot.
He was someone who was not your typical ace. He wasn't a golden boy. Mm-hmm. He's like 5'5". He didn't look like a fighter pilot.
In fact, he only went to the test for pilot training because his roommate was going. But once he got into a Cessna and started doing some flights, he realized that he loved the experience of flying. Now, flying a jet was a lot harder. When he got into jet training, he found that he was very quickly falling behind. He was not one of the golden boys, one of the people who just naturally have a feel for flying. So it took him a lot more work than others. He had to practice maneuvers many more times. He was nearly kicked out.
He felt like he had 3 strikes against him the moment he started. He was a slow learner. He wasn't a natural at it.
He had to put in more hours in the simulator than anyone else. He asked his instructor pilots to work him to death, and they did. They would have him practicing maneuvers until he was vomiting.
Embrace the pain, is what I say. Pain is good for you. It's great for you.
He was pushing into this much harder than others. And eventually he developed a fingertip feel. Eventually he got ahead of the plane. He got to a point where he could come to what to do next without having to think about it consciously.
And so he had to learn, I call it trusting the process, that if he practiced harder than the golden boys, if he spent more hours on the simulator than they did, if he didn't take for granted his skill, he would catch up with them.
This served him well. He had developed an incredible skill for focus, for narrowing down, and for getting things to the point where they were just automatic. He didn't have to put as much thought into it in the moment because he had done the work behind the scenes.
You have to be willing to go through that process and go through those hours.
So when it came time to do big joint exercises with numerous aircraft or flying in formation, he could think about the broader picture of what was happening around him rather than having to concentrate on all the little skills because he had already mastered those little skills.
It's like a soil that was so fertile with skills, something great was about to happen. And that's a path I think is really rich to imitate.
This sense of the situation around him served him very well when it came to combat. And when he came into multiple encounters with the enemy, he was prepared and won multiple dogfights, instantly doing things like dumping his fuel tanks to make the aircraft lighter and more maneuverable, making these automatic decisions without even thinking. It was just coming to him naturally. It was something that just came out of all the years of practice, something that was coming to the surface from all of that work.
Breakthrough moment that will come. You don't give up.
He would make decisions rapidly about how to work an enemy into a position where he would have the upper hand and eventually shoot them down. And when he would review the tape after these fights, people would ask him about what happened and he could barely remember it. It was all happening so fast. It was happening on a level that was subconscious, that was instinctive for him.
Something literally happens to the human brain. A transformation occurs.
After his first dogfight, he actually couldn't sleep for 3 days because his body had become so heightened, so aware, so prepared for that fight that it just stayed with him. All of this extra power, these resources of strength that he had, stayed with him. Cesar Rodriguez had come to a point where he could pull on his gifts automatically. He had come to a point where he could make the best maneuvers without even thinking about it. He'd come to a point where he had become a master. Cesar Rodriguez Jr.'s story is very similar to Robert Greene's story. Robert described himself as an unsuccessful writer. You can see that in his TED Talk that he did. That's excellent. It's got over 1 million views. And Robert always knew he wanted to be a writer, but he was discouraged along the way. One time a boss took him out for lunch, sat him down and said, "You should consider a different career."
And as you get older, you start to listen to other people, and you lose a sense of who you are. You listen to your parents who tell you, "Brendan, you got to become a lawyer. You need to go into this field."
But Robert kept going. He wrote magazine articles, he wrote plays, he wrote screenplays, he wrote novels. He kept trying. He did over 50 odd jobs by the time he was in his mid-30s.
As long as you're trying, as long as you're exploring, it'll probably come.
When Robert was 36 years old, he met a book packager by the name of Joost Elfers. And Joost got to talking to Robert about ideas for a book, and that's when Robert had the idea for the 48 Laws of Power.
It's never too late to make an adjustment or to find who you are. I didn't write the 48 Laws of Power or start writing until I was 36. And up until that moment, I was kind of a lost soul. I was kind of unhappy and I was wandering around. It can take time.
And once Robert started to think about this book that could have examples from history of all these situations where people had manipulated and made power moves and done these things, it all just clicked for him. All these years of Robert being in all these situations, he could pull on that instantly and begin to think up chapter after chapter.
Writing the books has kind of altered my brain and made me a lot better able.
This sort of dramatic change in a person, even in you, can happen slowly.
It's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. It depends on how old you are, where you are in life.
And it's easy to get derailed. It's easy to see superficial events in someone else and to want that for yourself. You see Robert and you think, well, he just bumped into Joost Elfers in his mid-30s, this guy who's a book packager, and then he just happened to write this smash success called the 48 Laws of Power, and he was off and running, and that's his career. And if you see that and you get hooked on those superficial things, then when you get to a point where you are building up these layers and layers of skills, but then you start to feel frustrated, you'll go and you'll deviate from that, and you'll go and look for something that's superficial so you can feel like you had a big success instead of just putting in that work.
As long as you're trying, as long as you're exploring, it'll probably come.
The key is that all along the way, you have to have perspective. You have to see that you're investing in yourself.
Your friends are all scrambling to make a lot of money, and you lose this connection to who you are, to what your strengths are, to what you love.
You have a set of unique experiences. There is no one who has been through a life like yours. But for some reason, we all want to give that up and instead go and be like other people and do what other people tell us.
And the problem that most people have is they follow what other people are doing, or they follow the career path that leads to the most money, the most attention, the most glory.
The important thing is to regain this sense of what's actually working for you. That's how you're going to build off of it. That's what you're going to be most focused on when you're doing the work. You will be more drawn to these things. You will go into them, and then as you're learning them and furthering your skills, you will be even more drawn to them if you are true to what's really right for yourself.
And the whole thing about learning is learning has to be fun. I know I'm contradicting myself in that I said frustration is good, but you need to also love what you're studying.
And along this process, nothing is wasted. If you make a mistake, if you find that something doesn't work, then you've narrowed the path, you've built a new skill along the way, something has happened that still will work to your favor. And then when you are well practiced, when you are well prepared, then you have that to bring to an opportunity, something like meeting that great book publisher. That is something that you can be ready for when you bring in your own preparedness.
Water is the essence of strategy. It's using the kind of energy of the moment.
If you can keep this up and put in 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, we all put in 10,000 hours of work, but you make it deliberate and meaningful, then you can develop a mind that is permanently altered, a mind that is more fluid, more intuitive, that can come to things automatically.
It's about fluidity. It's a certain philosophy of life.
And in time, this process can change you. It can bring you to a point where you have an animal-like instinct about where to go next, what to do. You can put that together with all of the rational things, with all of the thought out strategic things that you've come to over time. And you have this instinct about where to go next, about how to move quickly into things, how to take advantage of the situation, how to see things and spot trends before anyone else. And you can become a master.